South Korea's death penalty back in the spotlight in the lead up to Mr. Yoon's insurrection sentencing. While the country still retains the death penalty in its criminal code, the last executions took place in 1997, when 23 inmates were hanged under President Kim Jong-sam's administration. A turning point in the year after that, when Kim Dae-jung became president. He was a long-time democracy activist who had himself received the death sentence under a previous military regime. His sentence was later commuted, and he became an advocate for the abolishment of capital punishment. But no law was passed during his time and in the subsequent years to abolish this penalty, even as executions themselves were effectively suspended. And from that point on, successive governments, be they liberal or conservative, have maintained what is seen as a de facto moratorium. Dozens of individuals still remain on death row. As of this year, their sentences effectively suspended, but not overturned. Beyond capital punishment, history shows that even the harshest sentences handed down to former leaders do not always stand. I'll take former military leader Chun Do-hwan as an example. He was sentenced to death for his role in the 1979 coup, as well as for the violent suppression of pro-democracy protests. Roh Tae-woo, Chun's successor, received a lengthy prison term, but on appeal, sentences for both men were reduced and they were later pardoned, in a move described at that time as being in the interest of national unity. More recently, former President Park Geun-hye was released early from a 20-year prison term over corruption charges. She was later granted a presidential pardon. Her successor, Lee Myung-bak, as well jailed for corruption. He was later pardoned. While none of these instances necessarily have any bearing on what will happen eventually for Yoon Suk-yeol after today's verdict, it's still uncertain whether he will in fact serve that life sentence. And we're joined by Professor Mason Ritchie. He's Associate Professor of International Politics at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. He joins us from Seoul. Professor Ritchie, Mr. Yoon could have received one of three sentences, so either death penalty, imprisonment, life imprisonment with labor, life imprisonment without labor. He has got the second, so life imprisonment with labor. Given the weight of the legal evidence, does that for you, does the sentence match his charge?
It seems to me, honestly, like the Seoul District Court did a very thorough and meticulous job of weighing all of the evidence presented in court over the last months, both from the prosecution and from the defense. There was a very lengthy reading of the reasoning behind the judgment, including not only the important facts, but also the legal basis underlying the interpretation of those facts by the court and the application of the law to the established set of facts. And that inductive reasoning process came across to me, at least, as extremely balanced and well-reasoned. And the final verdict came down, of course, as guilty. Yoon, as well as his co-conspirators, guilty of insurrection. And in the case of former President Yoon himself, not only insurrection, but also being the mastermind and the ringleader of that insurrection. And really, the verdict, as well as the sentencing that comes on the heels of that, reflects, I think, a number of important things that, again, came out in the reasoning by the court. The first is that Yoon was, in fact, guilty of insurrection, that his martial law declaration was illegal, unconstitutional, unjustified, and moreover, and this is important, was intended to block the ability of the National Assembly to carry out its activities for what they termed, quote unquote, a considerable period of time. So this wasn't just meant to be for a few hours. It was meant to be for some considerable period of time in which the National Assembly was to be put out of action. Secondly, the verdict, as well as the sentencing, turned on the dispatch of the military in order to carry this out, of course, with the threat of violence there. And thirdly, the other important thing is that the court, acknowledged that this was obviously a serious blow to South Korea's democracy. So when you look at the sentence, namely life imprisonment with hard labor, that comes across to me as a reasonable sentence for the verdict. And there were some mitigating factors, I think, that prevented the court from taking it all the way up to the death penalty. First of all, I think there were three in particular. One is that there was no violence that was actually used, so no one was seriously injured or hurt. Second of all, the plan itself seemed to be relatively shoddily, or at least in a slipshod fashion planned.
Professor Ritchie,
so incompetence somehow played a role in that.
Point.
And then,
so in these 14 months, right, despite what you see as balanced and reasoned, a verdict plus sentencing, Mr. Yoon himself has consistently denied having any intentions that way or doing what the court accuses him of doing. And as you say, has the evidence to show that he has done what he has done. In these 14 months, do we have any insight into whether Mr. Yoon actually believes his own claims?
That's extremely difficult. It's hard to get inside of his head. Again, when we're looking at the mitigating factors, one of them was he does have a life record of public service, no previous record. He did serve as a prosecutor. There's a part of me that really believes that he probably thought that he was doing the right thing. The court, however, noted that there was no sense of remorse on Yoon's part, which sort of goes against the kind of mitigating thesis, and that he's never really admitted that he's done any criminal wrongdoing. Frankly, it's difficult to tell exactly what his mens rea was in the lead up to this. For lack of a term, speculation, I think it's fairly well-informed speculation, is that he had a decreasingly small number of advisors around him. He was in a very bad and closed information ecosystem around him that bred conspiracy theory beliefs. He was fairly influenced by YouTube right-wing conspiracy theorists, and I think that played into an echo chamber in the people around him. And there was, also, rumors, I think fairly well-founded ones, by the way, that he and his wife pay attention to shamanism, and that there were some sort of, shamanistic predictions, that led him to make this type of decision as well. As salacious as that comes across, it's probably fairly well-founded. So we're not exactly sure what, frankly, his mens rea was. It's a little hard to figure out, but he never, at least publicly, has admitted that he did anything criminally wrong and has never shown any remorse for it.
All right. Our correspondent earlier, Professor Ritchie, was saying the people she has spoken to anecdotally want to see an end to this. They want to see closure, so they are relieved to see the verdict, however that verdict turns. But he does have support. There are pictures of people weeping, people waving flags in support of Yoon Suk-yeol. How large is this support? And will we see a return to the stability that South Korea will need to move on from this?
Yeah, the far right in Korea has grown a lot in recent years. I mentioned earlier Yoon's belief in sort of YouTube and other social media fomented conspiracy theories about election fraud and anti-state activities, and et cetera, et cetera. There's a broader population on the extreme right or far right that also believes those conspiracy theories. That far right is now in communication and working with the far right in the United States, I note, by the way, as well. Charlie Kirk was in Korea just actually shortly before he was assassinated, actually, in the United States. So there is a far right that does support Yoon, that believes that this is all a very deep, conspiracy theory. It's not a huge percentage even on the right, but they are loud and they do have an impact on the main conservative opposition party. And as a result, the conservative opposition party is splintered. There's a part of them that wants to placate these people on the far right. There's a part of the conservative party that wants to turn the page and move on from Yoon. And right now there's a sort of civil war within the party, and I think that that's going to make it hard for South Korea to stabilize in some way, because you're going to have this element on the far right that's going to be sort of permanently destabilizing. And frankly, every democracy needs at least two parties who are opposed to each other, two functional parties that are opposed to each other. It's not great that the right here in Korea is so far off the rails, because that means that they're effectively a not very useful counterweight to the progressive ruling party now led by President Lee Jae-myung. I foresee some very difficult polarization, reconciliation, and probably it simply won't be reconciled politically here in the coming years, if not even longer.
All right, we'll be looking at local elections in just months from now. Thanks for joining us, Professor Mason Ritchie, Hankook University of Foreign Studies in Seoul. Thank you.